Hello, shall we start? Welcome, can you see me? Then. Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to LCF, to this UAL DESIS Lab event. I think most of you know me, but I am Francesco Mazzarella. I am reader in Design for Social Change at London College of Fashion. I'm member of the Center for Sustainable Fashion and also of the UAL DESIS Lab. And it's with a great honor that we have here Ezio Manzini from Politecnico di Milano and president of the DESIS Network. It's quite, I'm quite thrilled actually to say that this is a UAL DESIS lab event because we've been members of the international network since 2012, but in the past years the network, the lab was not very much active, or rather we've been all very busy, but we didn't have much support to make our work visible or connected as well, and to share what we've been doing. But thanks also to Trevor Kibble, we had now some support, and we have reactivated this DESIS lab. And with great new energy, we are launching the lab, and we welcome you all here. I think everyone knows Ezio Manzini, but it's important to read his very remarkable biography. Professor Ezio Manzini has been working in the field of design for sustainability for over 3 decades. Most recently, his interests have focused on social innovation, considered as a major driver of sustainable changes. From this perspective, he founded DESIS, an international network of design schools active in the field of design for social innovation and sustainability. Presently, Ezio is president of the DESIS Network and honorary professor at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. He has been guest professor in several design schools worldwide. And in 2024, the Design Research Society awarded him the Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations, Ezio. And it also
It means that you are really very old. This is the meaning.
And as well for me, it's quite emotional also to be chairing this event because Ezio was a mentor when I was a student in the Alta Scuola Politecnica in Milan. And then over the years, through engagement in the DESIS Lab, we've been in touch, sharing ideas. And a couple of years ago, we were together at the DESIS social design event, and Ezio almost challenged me and Cecilia Casas from Spain to do something together, and we launched a new DESIS cluster on design from the margins. So there is lots of new activities happening, and as well we are almost talked about how the field of design for social innovation is evolving over the years. And in fact, Ezio today came here with this provocation on, I love this title, Sailing Against the Wind. And he will share the scenario of collaboration, proximity and care in the current area marked by walls, wars and hatred. So he will reflect on 15 years of transformative social innovation that has shown us that it is possible to go upwind. That means that it's possible to think, make things happen and build parts of the world in contrast with the dominant tendencies. Today, the headwind is much stronger than ever. Therefore, going against it, it's more difficult. And yet, it is also more necessary than ever, but we must know how to do it in the new context. That is, by countering the winds of war, the construction of walls, and the culture of hatred that blows against us. So, Ezio will give us a talk for 40-45 minutes. I will then ask Ezio some questions. Please start thinking about comments or questions you may want to ask, because there will be time for Q&A from the audience. And there will be some time at the end to just mingle, network, before we finish at 5 p.m. So I think that's all from me. Just another thing. You may have noticed there is a camera. This event is being recorded. I hope you don't mind. If not, come and talk to me or Gabi, because we plan to share this event on the YouTube channel of LCF. We know it's almost Easter break. Many people were not available, and the room is quite small. Although it's nice to see it buzzing and busy, but we want to share it much more widely. So that's all. Did I forget anything, Gabi? No. Okay, so over to Ezio. Do you want?
Thank you. So, good afternoon. Thanks, Francesco. Thanks to the whole DESIS Lab here and the people that are not at DESIS Lab, but they will take the time to listen and hopefully to discuss afterwards. One thing that has not been said is that I've been professor in this university for 2 years, 10 years ago. And I am homesick time by time. So when I see somebody that, well, some of them, as Lorena, I know her since before, but some other have been the friend that started to be friend in that period. And well, for me at least, it was an interesting moment. So thanks also for that one. And I'm very happy when I have the possibility to come back. But now in this new place, it's too new, but in any case, is back in this community. So Francesco has read the summary, and this means that in some way it makes my job. So I could say, okay, this is the story, and we can finish. So this is why I call it sailing against the wind. And goodbye, it was very nice to meet you. And this has been also told in a very good English. Well, it's an Italian English maybe, but mine is much more rudimental, it's more sophisticated. In any case, I hope you will forgive my errors in English. So I am not going now to explain again, because roughly it has been explained, but I will talk about the scenario, and I will summarize. As has been said, since nowadays 15 years, my personal interest that has always been since I was at the beginning of my career on the environment and sustainability, and afterwards social sustainability, and afterward it became more and more on this issue about social innovation. That very probably you know, but I will say something very shortly to recall what I mean or we mean when we say social innovation. And these three words are in some way a kind of extreme summary of what I've learned. So we like social innovation, I like it, so I talk for myself, but I hope that also somebody else did the same journey, because we saw something that had give us the impression that it could be seen as anticipation and prototype of some way of living that could be in the direction that we want to go. That today, at least I say, we want to go toward an ecological and just society. This is, for what I got myself, the way in which I talk about sustainability today. Also, this maybe will come back afterwards. The issue is looking to what happened in these 15 years, and looking to the social innovation, we can extract some elements that are summarized in these three concepts. And my presentation is mainly about these three concepts, and that are interesting for me because they look like the possibility to be pillar for a new kind of ecological society, or many ecological societies, because you can have different societies that have in common something that we call a collaboration, a proximity approach, and care. But as has been anticipated a little bit before, I know that you don't need to see another picture of war. We saw so many, but in some way for me, and I hope also for you, it's very difficult to start whatever today without considering that while we are here in a beautiful place, healthy and safe and friendly in between different people that I see here, well, this is a little bubble. Something is happening outside that goes in a totally different direction. And so I think that, and this is a challenge for me, and I think for everybody, and in particular for my friend of the DESIS Lab, it's, okay, we have done a lot of things, we elaborate some ideas, we also have pressure to have learned something. But if it is true that things are changing, have changed and are changing dramatically so fast, and in a direction that is a very hostile direction, we have to ask ourselves if what we have tried to develop until now is valuable or not, because it's not said that what has been emerged 20 years ago, 15 years ago is still valuable. So in my view, this is the first main question that we have to have in our mind. Is still correct what we're saying, or things are changing so much that we have in some way to transform to what we consider positive, what we consider step toward an ecological and just society. For what regard myself, as well, maybe I've been said, but I repeat it, mine is a message of hope. And always, very often people tell me, oh, but you are so optimistic. And my answer is, as a designer, you have to be a professional optimist. Because if you have not the idea that you can bet on some potentiality, you can do maybe something else. Maybe you do not need to be optimist if you are a musician or if you are a painter. So you can design desperation. But if you are a designer, you have to do something to change the state of things. It means you change for the good. You cannot imagine to design something for the bad. Therefore, if you are a designer, you have to be optimist, but I have to contextualize optimism. Because I'm not so, frankly speaking, I'm not so optimist on the fact that we really will go in a positive direction, and now less than in the past. But the reality is complex, as we know, we always repeat. And in the complexity, there is it's not monologic. In the complexity, you have many different things, contradictions that happens. So what I call my optimism, the one that I try to transmit with the story that I tell, is that also in the darkest moment, if you look very attentively, you can find some lights. And in the moment in which I will not be capable to find some light, probably I will change my work. I will say that there is nothing to do, but we can find some light. So you can tell positive stories and fields and activities that can be done also in moments that as a whole appears to be so negative as they appear to me in this moment. So the message of hope is, okay, in this moment let's try to look what is happening and try to see if there is something that is still valuable and still active and lively, and we as designers can create conditions to help it. The issue probably, at least for me, and this is part of the challenge that I also say to the other, is that sometimes the same thing can change the meaning. So if we take, and I will develop in the next half an hour, some ideas that come from what we learn from social innovation, what you learn is some elements, some way of doing, some way of thinking, but the concept is inside a framework that is changed. So probably the same things has a different meaning. So the first step is to understand if there are something interesting, and the second is, in my view, to upgrade the meaning of what we have seen or what we have recognized as positive in the new context. And I think that this one, for sure, is very different, even though also myself, I don't know exactly what is the new meaning. So, as has been said, and also I repeated, my little story starts with the social innovation. I assume that more or less is known what we are talking about, but in any case, I will 2 minutes of your time to give some images and some words to be sure that we are on the same table. And it's not a definition, but it's simply to recognize that 15, now maybe 18 years ago, somebody, and especially in England, started to observe that in a society that was generally described as a society of individuals, you remember Margaret Thatcher? So there is no society, only individuals. And so this was a picture. There is no society, only individuals, without any link one with the other one that creates social fabric. And this was said, this is the way in which the people behave. The people prefer to, in the name of individual freedom, to cut the more than is possible the traditional relationships with the village, with the neighborhoods, with the family. All this, in some way, this tradition, modernity meant the melting of the majority of this traditional way of being in contact, one with the other ones. Okay, if this was the picture as it was written in the book, as it was also taught in the design school, somebody started to observe that it was true that many people was doing like that, but not all. There was also somebody that behaved and thought in a different way, and that in some way broke that way of thinking and doing. And what appeared was a kind of constellation, a small group of people doing what? For instance, living nearby and deciding to share some services and some space. At the time it was called the co-housing. Or instead of only waiting for some service delivered by some professional in relation to care and the safe and the health, to try to create some groups to help each other, and so to create the circle of care. Or to imagine different way of working that was not necessarily the work in the big company or the big factory or the big office, but to create the Fab Lab, what has been done by the maker movement. So another idea of what could be like to work in a productive way. Or to say, well, maybe the food is important, at the same time there is this distance in between the city and the countryside. Maybe we can create new systems that connect farmer with the citizen, creating food co-op, creating community-supported agriculture, creating a lot of, in our language, will be service idea. Service ideas that were based on the fact that the service was quite peculiar, because it was not the traditional service, somebody that serves, somebody that is served, but was people that organize themselves to serve each other, if you want. So we call it already, at that time, collaborative services, services that are based on the collaboration about people. And we can find something like this practically in every area of the daily life. So we are still 15 years, how the story was told 15 years ago. What we saw was not perceived by statistics. So it was something that you could not find in the official book or the trend in society, because there was so few that the number was not enough to see a trend. There was a lot, at that time people was talking a lot about the big trends, but this one disappeared. But looking very attentively in the society, you could recognize. And what some people did, included my group and the people with whom I worked, we started to say, hey, there is something very interesting. And why it was so interesting? Maybe now I'm too long, but what we did before discovering social innovation, we did, also here I did, before coming here for my, when I was here for 1 year, I was already working on social innovation. But the great idea was that before that, what we did the workshop, and the workshop was to create new ideas. And therefore we, student, researcher, teacher, worked together to create new idea, imagine that things can be done in this and that way. And we did it, so it was at least 10 years before that we did it. The difference is that at a certain point we recognized that in society somebody was already doing, because at the end of the day what in this workshop the student and ourselves in some way invented was very similar to something that we can find in the reality. And talking in between designers, the big step onward is that it's different if I try to convince people, showing some ideas and say, these ideas, where they come from? A group of students have this kind of idea. Or if you say, no, this is happening. Maybe not so many at the time, but people is doing it. So it's a prototype. You can see that it can work. Somebody is capable to make this choice and to make it happen. So when we discover that there was this possibility to attentively looking in the reality and extracting from the reality some example that could be prototype, that had inside some element of what we imagine to be a sustainable way of living, we make a jump, because instead of proposing ideas came up in a group of people that imagine something that they like, something that was already happening. And as a matter of fact, at the beginning of the story, maybe Lorraine remember it, our way of working as designer, we call it amplifying. So our goal was to be a kind of antennas, to look into the reality, to recognize some elements that could be interesting, and afterward to use our capability in presenting communication, movie, films, etc., to make them more visible. But this was really the beginning of the story. Another important thing is that we recognize that this group of people collaborating has been capable to organize the way to solve some problems. And therefore they were really very effective. So if somebody makes this kind of change in mind on how things can be done, the result was really very important. And it was possible, as I will say better in a while, to treat some problems that otherwise will be untractable. So problems that could not have solution if you don't change your mind. Okay, and they started to create social organization, social forms, and a new form of community that were the new communities. And we started to discuss about the new communities, because today there is many people talking about communities, but the communities can be very diverse, so it's important to understand. And at least at the moment, let's to say there are two kinds of communities. The communities where you have been born because they exist for tradition, as it was everywhere, in every possible region in the world. The family, the village, the neighborhoods, and there are communities that are perceived as normal. But those communities that are pre-modern community are the ones that modernity tend to melt. So they still exist in some place where more, in some place less. Normally in places less industrialized more, and the place highly industrialized less. But they are not a community by choice. They are a community of people that has been born in that village, and therefore the village has a community. The big difference of the new community that emerged through this kind of social innovation, as we observed 15 years ago, is that a new kind of social form that we can call communities based on the free choice to be part of. And therefore they have to be designed in some way, because they do not pre-exist. Somebody has to make something happen in the way that new kind of communities start to appear. So at that moment, as you can understand, we move from the simple amplifying what already exists, understanding better these communities, how they work, how and where, what are the difficulties to make them happen, and design as some group, team of people that help other people to organize themselves, creating this kind of new social forms, this kind of social network, and this kind of communities. So all this has been more or less not from the day one, but in the first 2 or 3 years, this kind of capability to understand things, or this understanding, have been sufficiently spread. Now let's jump 15 or maybe now even more than 50 years later. So I can tell you a story that appears as a story of success. Also it started with a very black scenario, but this could be said as a story of success. The small co-housing, small group of people that decided to be together and to share some services in many places in the world, including in London, Milano, and many places in the world. There are some some programs that could be private or public that generate what is called a collaborative living. So you have entire buildings that are designed from the beginning in the way that people can have their own apartment, but share some services, some space, etc., etc. That can be done well or not so well, but it's something that happens. So from these small ideas, it evolved toward big programs. The small circle of care that started also here in England, if you know Hilary Cottam, okay, she has been a kind of leader in the discussion about the importance of the of the circle of care, but in any case it was very, very small. Now, 15 years later, if you look some European document, you're not a European anymore, at least the English one are not European anymore, but in any case, if you know that place on the other side of the sea, it's called Europe, there is a government, and they do not work so well, but, no, sorry for the joke, you can find community-based welfare, or community welfare, or collaborative welfare. So many people at the level of who take the big decision start to keep in account that welfare is not only the professional delivery of service, but in some way they could be super confused, but assume that we have to include communities in the definition of the welfare. And we have to include communities because, as I will say in a while, there are some intractable problems that cannot be treated without asking a participation of the people, of the active citizens. So they cannot be solved in the traditional way. In any case, what happens is that everywhere in Italy, for sure, there are, at least in the wording, this talk about community welfare, or community-based welfare, or collaborative welfare. And I could continue, but I finish this part recalling something that for sure you know, that at the beginning of the story there have been cities in which there was many different little social innovation events, very separated one from the other one, and strange things that was happening. And now practically all the big cities that I know is talking about, I call it the city of proximity, but normally in the journal it's presented as the 15-minute city. I will say, if I will have time, that the possibility to talk about the 15-minute city today is only because for the previous 20 years something happened. So it's a kind of evolution of many urban social environment, social innovations, that at a certain point somebody has been capable to say, okay, this could correspond to a new vision of the city. I have to say, the idea of the city of proximity 50 minutes has a longer story. So it's not as an idea for some intellectual or some very special architect or James Jacobs, for instance, who know her, started to talk about the importance of the proximity, the city, the streets, the square, to be nearby, etc., etc. But there was little points. In the last 10 years, I don't know any city that pretended to be dynamic and projected toward the future that in some way do not talk about what does it mean to transform ourselves in the city of the 50 minutes. And I want to underline that even if this is, in my view, a very strong slogan, because everybody understands what it is. It's a city where whatever you need is more or less at 10-15 minutes walk or bicycle from where you are. But to imagine that you want to build a city with this direction is exactly the opposite of the direction in which has been built the city in modernity. That was to distance the people, to separate the function. So I have not now the time to go more in depth. Sometimes the same mayor do not understand well how revolutionary is to say, you know what, now we want to have the city of 50 minutes, because it means to rethink the whole way in which the city is working. But now now there are some examples. But what I want to say now, I don't know how I've been capable to make you understand what was my message. In any case, my message is, if we only look to social innovation, the one that we like, we see a kind of trajectory. Something happened from a beginning of small things toward policies, frames, systems, and this is interesting. As I was saying, I did not remember that it's here. Let's take the example of Paris. Paris it's very important. It's very easy to use the Paris example, not because it's the only city that took this idea of the 50-minute city, But it is Paris, so everybody knows very well. And the mayor, the lady mayor of Paris, used this slogan of the La Ville des Quarts d'Heure, the city of the 50 minutes, as the slogan for the campaign to be re-elected. So when she did it, all the journalists, all the people started to have the antenna, say, oh, what is happening in Paris? You know, because Paris, they all these men mayor that built the higher tower, the biggest things. So this was the main way of thinking how to regenerate the city. And this lady said, no, my city will be new because it will be a city of the 50 minutes. So there was not big tower, not a huge avenue, but something spread in all the cities. And what does it mean? It means, if we take Paris, if you go to Paris now, do not imagine that you see Paris because it's not something that is so visible, the change. But there have been several interventions that move in this direction. So, for instance, this is an office of the city, and the office of the city respond to the idea to be the more near that is possible to the citizens, and to be a place where you go to ask for something, but there is also some possibility to interact. So the atmosphere is the atmosphere of a bar. And afterwards they said, but you know what, the schools that are public in Paris are very frequently empty, because the kids go in the morning and maybe not in the afternoon, not in the holidays. So we have this asset that is a public asset. Why don't we transform the school in a place where there is not only teaching, but there is teaching and also a kind of social center and sports center, because the schools have also some technical devices, technical place, sports place. Or, and this also happened, I'm sure, I know that happens also here, the libraries that instead of being, also the libraries are distributed in the city, instead of being sort of only the place where they deliver books and give advice on books, can become a kind of center of cultural activities, different kind of cultural activities. So this, and the streets starting from, this started from Barcelona, that's another main place where very interesting events happens in this direction. The street, if we, today, is quite normal, if you say street, you think cars. And it's not only car and buses. So a place for mobility. And there have been this change, starting to think that the streets are public space. And the public space are not only for mobility. You can have a party, you can have a breakfast, you can have other kind of things. But we have to see how to make it, but to rethink the streets as public spaces and distributed public spaces. So what is new is that there has been a kind of direction from, in this case in Paris, from the top. There was the mayor that used the asset, that was public asset, to distribute in the city some activity and to create these activities in a hybrid way. So each activity could be many different things, and in this way to create more rich and diversified systems of proximity. So if we take this example, we can see a kind of evolution from a constellation of small cases to a brand new idea of city. I could do the same, talking about care and the transformation of welfare, about food and the transformation of the idea of food, non-industrial, not hyper-processed food, etc., etc. But I hope that this example that is sufficiently simple and clear make you understand what I intend to be. So, from grassroots initiative to broad programs and public policies. And this is the success story. And this is a success story because it happened in many places, and so we can say, look, if I think how things were 20 years ago and now, there has been a very good process. But in the complex system, there are not only one story, there are different stories. So now I can tell you very quickly another story that is not so good. So there have been some good ideas I am driving a car, I am alone, there are three seats that are empty, why don't we say to somebody, come with us, and we do it together? So this is the carpooling. I have a home with an empty bed and an empty couch, and maybe there are some tourists, or maybe there are some young people going around, why don't you come in? And we can share it, and this was the beginning. I have some objects that I want to exchange, why don't we organize a market to exchange our objects? Beautiful ideas that was at the beginning full of good intentions, because you understand. And afterward you read Uber, that is the grandson of the original carpooling, and Airbnb, that is the grandson of the couch surfing, and Amazon in some ways related to many small green markets that has been done. So what does it mean? That something happened during the trajectory that before I told you the good one. So from the small example toward the city of 15 minutes, from small example toward the idea of the welfare, community-based welfare, you could have the things turn in a different way. And I don't pretend that you have to agree with me, but Uber, Airbnb, and Amazon are monsters. Are the contrary of what had to happen. They are, by the design point of view, they are very user-centered. But this is really slapping in our face as designers, because we always say it has to be user-centered. What is more user-centered than Uber? Unfortunately, the one that drives is a slave, more or less, in terms of labor. Or rights. So all this generated what you know, the platform economy that produced the gig economy, that produced this instability, that produced the condition of peer to be working poors, the multiplication of the working poors. And I write these three because they are the most well known, but we could put many of them that are less well known. So this what does it mean? That the good ideas can evolve in a certain direction or not. And this, for me, is one of the motivations to maintain and to, in some way, support the use of innovation, social innovation. Because I told you, see, there are, after 15 years, there are many criticisms towards social innovation. And one of the criticisms is this notion of innovation sounds to be so managing something. No, okay, it has been heavily used by managers, but we can use it in a different way. And what tells the story? Why is it much better to say design for social innovation than design for social change? Because social change, say, okay, we will have a nice grassroots new initiative, a nice things, a kind of picture. I say, oh, look how beautiful are these people that are doing something together, fantastic. But do not say anything about what happened afterwards. Where in the story, if we consider that we are looking not to grassroots innovations, we are looking to innovations, grassroots initiatives, but to innovations, it means that there are some trajectory. So talking about innovation is not taking pictures, it's making films. You see in time, as I very shortly did before. I told you the story that brings to the beautiful, for me, city of proximity, but we can say the story, tell the story that moved from good ideas toward Airbnb or Amazon. So if you consider them as trajectory, you know that things change and evolve, and they can have different moments, and in different moments there could be different design questions that have to be answered. This S-shaped curve, for who has some knowledge about innovation, is at the basis of every possible, also the technological innovation is following this curve, and also the social one. And this tells us also another point that is very important, because at the beginning, how these social innovations happen. Because there are somebody that is so clever, so energetic, so entrepreneurial, that is capable to invent something new. And in the case of social change is a kind, we call it normally a social hero or heroine. So somebody that goes together and say, why don't we do a community garden 30 years ago? And maybe somebody of you remember the community gardens, they are so well known now. At the beginning, they were out of the law. And they asked people to fight against the police because what they did was not foreseen. So at the beginning, to start something new, you have to have a lot of energy and dedicate a lot of time, and therefore it's a kind of a heroic activity that you have to do. And by the point of view of design, but I will talk about design later. Afterward, there is a moment of relative consolidation, and afterward, if it is successful, it could find a condition of a new normality. It becomes normal. But also in this case, become normal do not mean that everybody does like this. For the people that do it, for some reason, they become normal. If I take the example of the community garden, simply because it's one of the most well-known and simple example, at the beginning, who started, it was called guerrilla gardeners 35 years ago. The one that did the community garden, because they was out of the law at the end. So they took the responsibility to take some risk and to organize a community garden against all the others. Afterward, it started to consolidate, and so you could have the first community garden in New York or maybe here, and afterward, today, in Italy at least, but I think also here, if there is an abandoned lot, somebody say, look, we will take it, the city normally give you the red carpet because they recognize that there are somebody that is willing to improve the quality of the city for free, by the point of view of the city. And therefore, it's one of the important things of talking about social innovation, and not only social change, grassroots initiatives, is that you have to consider in which point you are of this story. And all these activities have some designer, but not necessarily the designer are professional designers. And as a matter of fact, the 90.9% of the beginning of the story are not done by designers. And this is also why the older one may remember that 20 years ago when we said, oh, we could make design for social innovation, but say, but they are not designers, they do it by themselves. But also in the first phase, you can have what in our language is called design activism. There are books written, there are people doing. Design activism is not here, because here it can disturb. It could be even negative, but it could be very interesting at the beginning, because they break some rules, they do something that was not foreseen, and so there could be some kind of discussion. And therefore, if you have a very strong activist, but also artist, so the artist here in this University of the Art, when I was here, there was some colleagues that was doing fantastic work as artists that could be seen as provocative action to start some ideas that eventually could go on and become something else. The second one, the consolidation, is what we normally see in the picture, what I call the post-it design. So you see people around the table that discuss, and the designer are there as facilitators of this process. So the spirit of the facilitators is very different from the spirit of the activist. So the activist has to try to throw stones, metaphorically, and the other one has to create positive environments. So it's a totally different way of thinking, even though they are both designer. And when you arrive at the consolidation, you have also more traditional way of designing, because if you take, for instance, the bike share, the bike, come si chiama le bike share? The bike sharing, the one that you can find around. Yes. You need to design the bike, you need to design the way to pay, you need to design the interface. So at that point, when it's consolidated, you need to have specialized product, service, communication that cannot be designed by somebody that is not a designer. So even though it could appear not intuitive, even though everything is designed, so everything is designed, but there is a growing need of a professional designer the more that you move on this curve. And not only for the reason that I said now, that at the beginning, you take the story of the bicycle, at the beginning you have, let's organize a critical mass. You know what is critical mass? So it's a design intervention, a critical mass. But you don't need to be a designer to organize a critical mass. If the critical mass evolves and you have the condition in which the city starts to recognize that they have to design the path for the bicycle, or there is a company that wants to introduce the that kind of bike sharing, somebody has to design, or a planner, a professional planner that design the path for the bicycle, or the product service system that design the system that permits to have the bike sharing that we see now. So this is to say that we recognize or we clarify to ourselves that there is no one discipline that is called design for social innovation, but it's an attitude that can be expressed in many different ways, as I tried to present until now. And beyond all this, because now I said, I recall the technicality, the tools that we have to use, there is the point from where I started. So during this journey, the difficulty is not to lose the original quality. And not to lose the original quality, ask to have a clear what the original quality was. Because sometimes when you start, something is done in a very intuitive way, so it's not so clear where the quality are. But you say, okay, but what has to happen? What are the qualities that have to be maintained during the evolution, the S-shaped trajectory, not to lose the values? And this is a point of view, it's a question. As I told you, and so I'm going to finish in 5 minutes, for me, the summary of what are the values is much more complex than this, but to try to make it more easy to be told, I summarize in social ecological value that are collaboration, and sufficiently clear that all the things that I've talked about are about breaking the individualistic idea of being in competition with the others, and considering that we can do something with others that help in solve some difficult problems. Care, that is a very fundamental issue of every possible ecological discussion. That means that we need to give attention and to give the time that is necessary. And our modern society not only are individualistic, but they have been described as the careless societies. And they are careless because in some way all the offer of technology and the attitude has to be said that care is something, a burden. It is a burden. Care asks for attention, asks for time, and the most of the things that we do also have done as a designer, the claim of the advertisement has, if you buy this product, you have not to care. You have not to care of your health because you have the good medicine. You have not to care to how you make clean the clothes because there is a very intelligent washing machine. So you have not to care. And this is tricky because, of course, sometimes we can hate to care for something. So it's a benediction that we can avoid to care. But at the end of the story, we cannot live in a society without care. And so we have to find a new equilibrium in between what we imagine that is good to do in an effective way, in an efficient way, and when we need to do something in terms of care. And to do something in terms of care, ask for two very important points. One very important point is for time. So now I want to close, but maybe if you make some question, I can answer later. There are some activities that you can do in a time that, thanks to some technologies, thanks to some reorganization of the system, you can reduce the time. There are some activity that you cannot reduce the time. The time, we say, cannot be compressed. And I give you the example. If there is somebody in the bed and has to go to the bathroom and afterward to the bed again, and you are there to care for this person, the time is the time that this person take to get out from the bed, to go to the bathroom, to do what he do, and to go back. You cannot make a machine that reduces the time, because that time is what it is. And therefore, there is a very huge contrast in our life, even when we recognize the importance of care, because of course, we cannot totally non-consider effectiveness and efficiency, because it's not for other reason, for the resources. But at the same time, we have not to forget that we need care by many points of view. And therefore, design is design exactly because there is no one single answer to this question. It's a balance. We have to find a way to combine the time of effectiveness and the time of care that are in contrast one with the other one, but we have to find a way to make them live together. And what about proximity? The proximity is not only, as in the example that I did before, of the way in which I told the story of the city, that everything is near, and therefore you spend less time to go to work, to bring the kids to school, or whatever. But by the way, in the city is good, because it also means to reduce the traffic, to reduce the pollution, etc., etc. But it is also the relational proximity. So in all the language, also in English, to be close is not only to be close physically, but to be open to the other, to have an empathic relationship. So we say a sense of proximity is also a human relationship, the way in which we have the human relationship. But the human relationship of proximity, that is at the end care, asks for the physical proximity. And okay, now I have to finish in 2 minutes, but no, this is very important. For me, has been, I tried to tell very quickly something that for me has been fundamental when I started to understand it, or somebody taught me. In this case, who taught me? Through a book, is a lady, because all the issue about care is mainly issues that come from the feminist movement. And this lady is Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. I don't know if you know her. She wrote a lot of things. One of these is called Matter of Care. And what was really striking me is that she said the care is tactile. And what means tactile? It means that you can see without being seen, you can hear without talking. But if you touch somebody, somebody is touching you. So it's reciprocal. And care asks to be at the distance in which you can touch the other one. And you cannot have care without reducing the distance in between you and the object of care. So, against all the discussion that has been done on the fact that we can do everything, whatever, because we have the digital blah, 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 if we want to have care, we need to reorganize our society in the way that we have physical relationships. We have bodies in the space in front to others. This do not mean that we cannot use. So this little story of helping somebody going to bathroom could also have a digital platform that help to organize the people that can bring what is needed, etc. So it's not said the complete story about care as totally to be only on the physical world. It can use also the digital one and also the metaverso if you want. But at the end of the day, if you have care, there are to be somebody in front to somebody else. This is what I learned from the experience on one side, looking how things were going, and in a more theoretical side by this lady de la Bella Casa, and this idea that care is tactile. Okay, now I finish. I only say one thing in 1 minute. Let's go back to the beginning. the, progressively, me and my friends, because it's a journey that has not been done by me alone, it has been done by a community of people discussing for 20 years and making also making experiences and discussing on these experiences. So this has been generated in a moment. There was maybe 10, 15, 5 years ago. And I started saying, and now what happens when we look around us? The war, Trump, Musk, all this story. I said, maybe we have to look what is the meaning of collaboration, kind of proximity. And for me, the meaning can be very good today, maybe more than in the past, because if they are presenting a scenario that is done of war, or walls, or hate, this is exactly the opposite of collaboration, care, and proximity. So in some way, they have been born, for me and the people that started to do it, in an atmosphere that could be different, but now more than ever, it's the basis for a good scenario of peace. Whatever could be, a scenario of peace, it has to be based on the idea that a human being can exchange in terms of collaboration and not creating distance, in terms of care, that means to be in touch, and in care of proximity, that means what I tried to say before. So I think that the three words maybe started in a different context, so with a relatively different meaning, but in the new context, in the context in which there is this push to create the condition of war, they could also be not only in the perspective of a hopeful, ecological and just society, but also to give a direction of what can be done to be people that design for peace. Thank you. Good. You survived it? Yes.
Thanks, Ezio. Very, very inspiring. And it's so difficult maybe to summarize a few words, but actually what stayed with me was, actually you started from the very horrible and dark pictures of the war and conflicts, and as well the words you said, the context is so dramatic that it changes the meaning of the story itself. So I feel we all feel a bit hopeless sometimes and overwhelmed, but you twisted it towards hope, and as well I also define myself as an optimist, and it's great also at CSF we are hosting a day of imagining possibilities of hope, so I hope as well this will be a message of hope for everyone. Also, of course, your examples on place making or city making are also very relevant to UAL and LCF. We are all place making a very strong agenda here in our colleges, and also being parachuted into East London 2 years ago almost. We are trying to make meaningful connections with the local communities, and of course we have a lot to learn from the DESIS network. And then actually I forgot to mention, of course, the Cultures of Resilience project that you did here at UAL some years ago, and it's amazing every time you come.
Ago.
10 years ago actually now.
11,
From
16.
yeah, until and as well every time you come you have the power and the magic power to bring us all together. That doesn't happen that often, but and as well resilience was a word that you used 10 years ago, and even more now. We have to be resilient to resist and to stand up in the face of all these disasters and crises that we are witnessing. Although as well resilience is a word that I don't very much like, maybe it's also to be retaught this time. And then as well I liked also the curve with design activism. I do define myself sometimes or frame my work as activism, because I sometimes, as you said, the word innovation has become so co-opted and commodified that it's lost its meaning, so I tend to stay away from that. And finally as well, I love this care as being tactile, and I think for us designers and artists who make things, it's also great to make the very intangible qualities of care become more tangible. I've prepared a few questions just to kick us off, but please, there is time for questions from the audience, so think about your questions and comments. So my first question is about, given that the world is in massive financial crisis and it seems to be leading into increasing oppression and disasters, what advice would you give to us who develop design for social innovation with marginalized communities to carry on and keep going? And possibly as well also considering there are students, PhD students, what advice would you give to young designers who want to take this path on design for social innovation?
But this is one of those questions that could be very rhetoric, and also the answer, you have to have hope. Sorry, of course, you have to have hope in the future. So, of course, you have to have hope in the future. In my view, in some way I already answered to this question before, and when I tried to describe for myself, so I cannot say what you have to do, I can only tell how I see the story, and to say, to be capable to see what is happening. So we have to be aware, at least who is aware, who we consider the situation in which we are a disaster. And in any case, very difficult and many wars, etc., etc. So this has to be seen. And we have not to be overwhelmed by these difficulties. And for me, the key of the solution is that the reality is not monolithic, is not a perfect diamond. So there is always something that escapes. There are always something that is in contradiction. So for instance, I don't know, come si dice complottista in inglese?
Claire?
Complottista is...
But it's not so important. In any case, there are some theory that always try to make a perfect explanation of everything, that it looks like there are some bad boy somewhere that is keeping everything under control. I think that is not true. In some way it's even more difficult, because if there was the bad guy somewhere that have organized something, it would be sufficient to kill the bad guy and everything will be solved. But it's not like this, because there are a lot of horrible guys, but not because some of them guide all the story. They simply have the power, when something happens, to take the best position. This is why they are so powerful. But something happened that is also outside from what are their own decision. And if it is outside from the decision of the very powerful, it's also something that could be interesting for us. So the little stories of, for instance, of social innovation. I talk about social innovation, but maybe you can find interesting story also in other fields, looking at the reality in a different way. It's only if we really try to understand deeply the complexity, and this probably is more difficult in between you from the European than from the people come from Asia, because we had a story in which we, for 3 centuries, we started to say the reality was in some way simplified. So it could be simplified, the reality. And this did not happen in China or in Japan, etc. So I don't know how you have to do, but for us in Europe, and unfortunately for the world, this Western modernist way idea has been dominant. So all of us has to try to break this idea that somebody can control everything. Nobody can control anything, even Trump. Trump do not control himself. But so if it is like this, we have to be capable to recognize where there is something that is coherent with some ideas. But we need to have ideas, because if you don't have ideas, you don't know what to choose. So when I said at the beginning of the story, we only amplify the weak signals. And they say, but this is not design. No, this is what totally design, because the society was offering so many different options that create the filter that permit to say, oh, look, these people doing this kind of circle of care. It's very interesting. It was very interesting because in an implicit way, you are using some criteria that you like because they help each other. And therefore, you need to have some criteria that are coherent with the vision, and afterward be capable to navigate in this reality. And in my view, for the student and for the teacher and for the school, what we should be capable to do is to navigate, in this case against the wind, and to navigate by sail. Because if I can afterwards, this answer is too long, but one of metaphor that I use very frequently, at the end of the day, living in general, if you want to live trying to develop some capabilities, and design in particular, is as sailing, and not as, how you say, driving a motorboat. Because if you imagine that you have to go from A to B with a motorboat, you can say, okay, I want to go there, I put my ship in that direction, I put the gas, and I try to go in that direction. And I consider my trajectory, my itinerary, if I am more or less in the right direction. As you know, even the ones that do not sail is not working like this. Because if you want to go there, probably you have to do like that. No, I don't know how you say in English, but bordeggiando, in Italian it's bordeggiando. And means that I want to go there, but in this moment I go in this direction, and after in this direction. Why? Because there are some opportunities. And the opportunities in the case of the sailing are the wind and the flow. And therefore I have to be capable to recognize the wind and to be capable to use, in the good sense of the term, the wind, even though the wind is not exactly on the back, that push me in that direction directly, and I have to do this kind of work. And I have to be capable to sail, because if you have the wind, you know where you want to go, and you are not capable to sail, you cannot do it. So there is an expertise in that. And you need to have a good boat, because a sailing boat is a good boat. It's a super sophisticated technology. To imagine, to sail is not say, oh, you want to go back. No, you can sail also with the most modern technologies, but modern technologies that help you to understand the conditions and afterward help you to use the very small opportunities to make something that brings you in a direction. But of course, the first thing is to know where you want to go, and in some way to be flexible, maybe also to change a little bit, because maybe you cannot really go in that place. So we should teach to navigate, to sail in the complexity, and it means to have ideas, long-term ideas, capability to recognize the super local, exactly where you are, what are the capabilities. So something that is very long and something that is very local, very context related. And afterward having some tools that permit to use the small or big opportunities that you can have locally to make some moves that at the end of the day brings you in that direction.
Wow. I love this metaphor. From now on, all designers must be sailors. Thank you. One thing I would like to also add, you not only have to have ideas, but also values, I think. And I think often there is a crisis of values, or sometimes even when these social innovations, as you showed us, started from some good values, then they get co-opted by other values. So I think values is always another important thing to highlight. Another question I have is that recently you reframed the DESIS network as a pluriversal contact zone.
This is when I want to talk in a difficult way.
Yeah. In fact, can you explain us in a few words and in simple way what do you mean by this, and how the DESIS network is approaching the coloniality and shifting its initial focus from the global north towards other centers?
Yeah. Okay.
One sentence.
So I start from the end, and afterward I explain you this more difficult terminology. It's difficult, sometimes the difficult terminology are useful because they permit to express in one word something that otherwise require 10 minutes of explanation. And therefore sometimes I use it. But in any case, the history of design, and I represent in terms of time, quasi half. So design as a discipline as 1 century. And I am more or less designer since 50 years. So I have seen half of the story of design. And it's not that I did the story, I seen the story. Do not misunderstand me. And all the story of design has been a European dialect. Because design started with the industry, and the industry started in Europe, and was a way to talk about what was happening. And it was happening in Europe, and afterwards was in America. So I regret, but it's like this. Also now, most of the book of design talk in maybe the language is Chinese or is Indian, or is Indian is English, but or no, it's many different Indian languages. But at the end, they tell a story, they think in a European way. And this is a matter of fact, so it's a history, we cannot change it. What we can do? Well, now it's changing in some way, because there are many other regions in the world that are developing design, at the beginning using the tools that has been, the conceptual tools that has been imported from Europe, and afterward trying to challenge themselves. What does it mean to translate all this story in Chinese, in Japanese, in Arab, and so on and so forth? So we have to, me, I am European, I am white, I am male, I am 80-year-old, and therefore I am what I am. I cannot escape from my story, from my body, but one of the possibility for the European is to be reflexive, so to try to think, to recognize that something is happening. So personally, I recognize and I think that is super good ideas that many people start to say we have to decolonize design, because it has to be decolonized, because more than decolonized, it has to be changed starting from different roots, probably. But I cannot do it because I cannot escape from myself. So therefore, what we can do, we can create opportunities of discussion in which different worldview have voice. And this is to create also, it's not a big thing, but DESIS Network is an international network in which we are very proud of having not every kind of ethnic group in the planet, but many of them. And we desperately, maybe at the beginning it was not so clear even for us how much it was Europe-centric, but now we do our best to consider that it's not only a European point of view, to give voice to others. So this is what we are trying to do. And for who is speaking now, me, I cannot play the role of being Aboriginal from New Zealand or from, I am what I am, but I can try to give opportunity to other point of view to express themselves and to create a safe place where this kind of dialogue can happen. And this is this very difficult term, the pluriversal contact zone, that is not invented by me, means this for me. If you want the real reference, it comes from a very big person for me that I love him a lot. That is called Arturo Escobar. Do you know some of you? Arturo Escobar is a little bit in between design and anthropology. They mainly are studying also different ethnical groups. And he, a colleague of his called Maria de la Cadena, developed this idea that because they talk about pluriversal, so pluriverse is a space in which different ways of looking the world and building the world are expressed, and the pluriversal contact zone is when different point of view, more than point of view, different world building, so creation, so each culture creates its own world, and and afterward there could be some space, some zones in which this different wording, they call it wording, creation of world, can coexist and in some way also find a way to collaborate. So this is a big challenge of our, if we don't want to end up in making war everybody against everybody else, we have to create opportunities to have this moment of exchange. And there is not so much to say beyond to make it. So for instance, I'm very proud, not proud, so if I use this term, maybe sometimes my English is not so good, so proud, I can say proud, it's politically correct, I can be proud.
Yes.
If I can say, I am proud that we succeed in having different positions and to try to maintain it. It's totally imperfect, it's not a paradise, but it's a place where we are not pushing out anybody. Where, for instance, I am also very friend of the one of Cumulus. I don't know if you do Cumulus, but at a certain point in Cumulus, the Russians are not anymore in Cumulus. It's a very complicated issue. The next Cumulus will be conference. Cumulus is a big association of this Cumulus of design. The next one will be in Nantes, in France, as there will be a discussion exactly on this topic. So what could be the role of the networks, of the international networks, in relation to a planet in which apparently, not more than apparently, unfortunately, in which the societies are splitting in groups, one against the other one. So what we do, international organizations, in our case, the design-oriented international organization. Because when we start, all the organizations that are international started after the war, in the idea that there was a possibility to have diplomacy and discussion to reduce the risk of war. So from the UNA to Cumulus, to DESIS, the idea was, okay, we are all here, let's go together, and we move in the direction that we thought. That was the direction that everybody was going, the society, the planet was going. Now, it's not like this. Now, there are big forces that are pushing toward splitting the planet in different areas. And so what we do, the network has to continuously maintain the relationships, or we have to create, as we know, more globalization, we have a sub-globalization, the globalization of the friends, and we have to do the networks of the friends. That means networks against the enemies, because if you say the network of the friends, it means there are somebody that is not friend. Or we have to maintain desperately the network open to everybody, also to the one that eventually you don't like so much, to maintain a ground of conversation. This is a little bit beyond our discussion today, but it's a discussion for us as human beings, and in the case that you are in an international organization, it's an issue of the international organization. So if you go to Nantes, you know that there will be a discussion with several networks discussing about can we be expression of a culture of peace.
Thank you. And also at the last Cumulus in Budapest as well, there was a DESIS event on peace as well.
This one, let's say, that one was done by us because maybe this is not so interesting. In any case, Cumulus is a big organization, very official. DESIS is more hedgy, so we have an opinion. Cumulus is more, has to represent the school officially. We do not represent the school officially. We represent a group that recognize themselves in the... So we launched as DESIS this idea. The same that I said now has been launched in that meeting, in that conference, and luckily, so it means that in Cumulus there are people that are good for me, from my point of view. Now it's Cumulus with us, but it's Cumulus that organized. So it's not a kind of provocation done by DESIS. It's officially in the Cumulus program. There is one session to discuss about the role of the networks.
Great. well, possibly it was like an activism, like planting a seed of activism that's consolidating now, maybe looking at your curve. Another question I have is also, well, I'm so grateful that you provided support to this new DESIS cluster that I created with Cecilia Casas from Spain, called the Design from the Margins. And because we saw as well, we reflected on the evolution of design for social innovation, and we thought that considering the world and there is increasing marginalization of societies, we need to rethink beyond these bottom-up initiatives that often look like driven by people from the middle class. And how do you see this cluster as original and relevant in also marking a shift in the field of design for social innovation?
The premise is that I said before that after 15 years there are some results and some criticism towards social innovation. And one criticism that is very strong, well, very strong, is potentially strong, is that social innovation, given that it asks exactly because it asks for collaboration, care, etc., is something for who has the time to do it. And who has the time to do it is mainly the middle class. So all the story about social innovation is a way to make the life of an impoverished middle class a little bit better. And if you take, I can talk for Italy, but I'm sure that here will be the same. There are some places in Italy, some cities that are have been particularly dynamic in terms of what we call social innovation. And if you make the map of where this initiative happens, they do not happen in the place that are the poorest. So there is no coincidence between poverty and social innovation. And therefore, here you have different opinion. My opinion is that the good ideas emerge where they can emerge. And afterward, the issue is to bring the good ideas also where they could have more difficulties to emerge. So just to make an example, not to be too abstract, if the issue about the co-housing. The co-housing started 30, 40 years ago, more or less everywhere in the world, at least everywhere in the Western world at least, and they was done by middle class. Hippies maybe, but the hippies were middle class, mainly. But they started to say that it's possible also to live in not only that model that has been generated in the 19th century, because our houses have been generated in the 19th century with the urbanization, and that was the model of the bourgeoisie, or the bourgeoisie. You understand bourgeoisie? Okay. And it's more than 1 century that we are living in that model, but it's such a good model for who are really poor? No, because you have a very small box in which you are supposed to have everything inside. And so you say, look, but if you imagine that it could be possible to share a place for the kids, you can share a room for the guest, you can have, you have a very small kitchen, but you can have a big kitchen that can be shared by many people. It could be good also for the poor. It could be even more important for the poor that are obliged to have small flats. But until now it do not happen. So the idea emerged now, moving from the co-housing toward some organization in Italy and also another place where they promote social housing, also with social, that means sharing something. Well, it's a way to move away from the original group of people that was capable, that had the time, the energy to make all the effort that is necessary, because it's very difficult to set up a co-housing. It became more easy, so it could be done also by people that do not have so much time and so much energy, attention, because they have too many other kind of problems. So this is the first thing. The idea can start, and this is very basic for social innovation. Social innovation starts where it's possible, and it's possible if there are somebody that have the energy to do it. If there is somebody that is so poor that they cannot imagine the day after tomorrow morning, because they cannot try to do something else. And therefore the issue, this is why it's important what they said, and this cluster, is, okay, personally I defend that even though social innovation that we have seen in these 15 years has been mainly an issue for middle class, but there have been a set of ideas so powerful that can, as they went toward the neoliberal platform economy, they can also turn toward being something good also for the poorest and the fragiles. And therefore we have to see what can be done, because now I stop, but it's more easy to be said afterward than be done. It's not only bottom-up, it has to have a different kind of relationship between top-down and bottom-up. For example, for what regards myself, at least in the place that I know better, there should be a different role of the state. So there is, I wrote a book. This is only Italian and will remain only Italian because it's very Italian. That is really, no, it's very Italian because all the examples are Italian. But in any case, it talks about the redefinition of the idea of public service. Imagine that the public service should also have the role of helping reweaving the society and bringing the reweave of the society also in the place that are not the one of the small middle class willing to live a little bit better, but also toward the poor. And the example, when I talk you about, it was Paris, but could be many places, having a network of schools, and the schools are also in the most difficult places, is different if there is the same school that become a place to reorganize, to generate new energies and help people to organize something, than if you have to do from zero. And therefore, the hope is that if we have a kind of new disequality, that is the disequality in between those that have time and energy and attention, and the one that live such a life that cannot do it, because this can happen. It's a new kind of disequality, but the role of the state is to reduce, should be, the good state, should be to reduce the disequality, and so in the way in which they reduce the disequality in relation to health, they should reduce the disequality in the possibility of people to imagine a welfare that is based on also some community relationships. And this could be a beginning of thinking the role of the state, of the we say the public, to say the state, that is not the zero state as the new anarcho-capitalist that we have in power now in the United States, and is not dreaming back the state, the powerful, hierarchic, vertical, bureaucratic state of the Union, of the URS, or even Europe in some way. So a state that is capable to create enabling system, create infrastructure that help people, instead of being the more and more individual, to be a little bit more together.
Thank you. And this leads to my last question before we open up. So actually you talk about public spaces and the role in this case like would be local councils, and this is very relevant to us at UAL because social purpose and placemaking are key driving agendas of the work we do at UAL. And based on your experience working in so many different design schools across the international DESIS network, what advice would you give us to reinforce our role as agents of change within our local communities? And possibly also thinking about teaching practice, because the DESIS network is very much driven by teaching practice that mobilize an untapped mass of young designers as change agents. In what ways can we leverage the transformative power of our teaching practice and PhD students to contribute to impactful research and knowledge exchange in our communities?
Okay, so if this is the final question, it will not Wagnerian, but it will very, very low-profile answer. So it will not be the final. So I think there is something very practical. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and but first of all, I think the disciplines are a good thing. So we have to be capable to discuss with many different people, but we have also to be capable to know who we are and to have our own tool and to bring to the conversation something. So this is very difficult. There is a very old story that maybe the teachers know, that the T-shaped formation. So there's a vertical, what you know in depth, and the horizontal, that is your capability to talk with the others. So always we have to find the right equilibrium in between what is horizontal and what is vertical. Because some disciplines and traditionally have been two silos. You know only what you know, and you are not capable to interact with others and to understand the others. And so you need something horizontal to be capable to understand the others, to talk with the others, etc. But sometimes, and this happened in the Faculty of Architecture, where I was born, by the way, that in the name of talking a little bit with everybody, we progressively lose the vertical specialization, and we were talking about everything and nothing. And so at the end of the day, people say, and so, but what do you really do? We talk, we have relationships, we do things, but we things that not only because it's a little bit hilarious to tell the story, but the project are interdisciplinary. The project, the process in the project. So there is no one project today that can be done by one discipline. But the misunderstanding is that it's not that there is a discipline that have to involve all the others. If you have 6 people around the table, 6 people has to bring something that is very, very personal, the new way of doing it. So the specificity that you know because you have studied, you have made specific experiences in that. So you are bringing contribution to the conversation. Otherwise, if it is too much only the horizontal, it's only a kind of blah blah blah, in which everybody, whatever, it could be a designer or a manager or an engineer or whatever, more or less they use the same term in the same way. No, if you have four people around the table, each one of them has to have some very strong proposal. But afterward, he or she has to be capable to talk with the other. So the equilibrium in between what is horizontal and what is vertical, there is no one mathematical law to say what it is. But I think that is important. Secondly, if we are in design, we are more or less, I think, designer here, no? A professional designer. So maybe you don't know, but I wrote a book many years ago. There was Design When Everybody Designs, telling the story that in some way design is a gift that everybody can express. But as I said also in my previous presentation, there are some moments in which we need some professionality. And in my view, we have to be more clear what is the profession. So when we are around the table, what I'm bringing. And now we have a problem because once upon a day, when design was to design a chair or design a lamp or design a cloth, you had your beautiful book, you show your book, and you say, what you're capable to do, you show your book, oh, how beautiful things you're doing. And that was enough to understand if this was a good designer or not. But if you design to promote the care in welfare and a new kind of organization for having people that exchange mutual help, what you show in your book is difficult to say. Oh, so on one side, we should have the capability of making things more clear and visible, what we do. So a kind of strategy to make visible the invisible, because otherwise we have a beautiful project that cannot be told because it's so difficult to try to explain what it is. So to have a special capability to make visible something that otherwise will be very difficult to be seen. Before I was joking, a lot of what is co-design, blah, 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 become a post-it design. So look in the brochure, what you see. People around the table, maybe nice people, happy people, with many stickers, and they put stickers on the wall. And so they are all the same. You don't see what they are doing. Of course, I am not against using the sticker and putting the sticker on the wall, but I mean, we should be capable to show something else if we want to say what we are doing at that table than simply writing on the post-it and put the post-it on the wall. And therefore, there is to work on what does it mean to make visible something in on subjects that are so complex. And sometimes what happens that if somebody says, let's make, we create this thing, and afterward there is a lamp, it's a beautiful lamp, everybody take the picture of the lamp, and instead of talking about the system, how it works, people end up talking about the lamp because the lamp is visible, tangible, etc., etc. Or you understand what I think what you do. So I think that these are two very basic issues, and especially so there are different schools of design. In my view, not only for the little story of my trajectories with the A shape, but I try to say that you can have very different attitudes. So you can be an artist, or was he something in between art and design, and probably you are in the moment you have to generate new ideas. You can be a kind of social worker, so somebody that is capable to put together the idea and to help people in design thinking. And you can be a digital designer that design a new platform, that design a new device. So you can be whatever. It's important to see that you can be whatever, and not to risk that when we talk about social issue, everything becomes co-design. With all the respect of the co-design. You can imagine if I am not respecting the co-design, but it's not only co-design. And also in the co-design, and now maybe somebody will look at me, I think that the designers are not neutral facilitator. So if we are in a table of co-design, we have the responsibility to bring ideas. So we are not there only to listen. Of course, we have to listen. But if we are there, we are the ones that have expertise, we have seen, we have the luxury of spending time and looking to different, and the other also are designers in some way. But they have not had the possibility to have the experiences. And so if we sit at the table, we have to bring some ideas and to challenge the others, etc. So to be more risky, so to accept the risk, because, and not, for instance, but no, let's stop here. But I want to say one last thing. This is more on the school. As there are different designers, it's more than correct that you can have very different schools with different profile. And so if you are in the ULL or Royal College of Arts, it's very different that you are a design school in an engineering. You have also here, no? Designer that I imagine that are related to some technical organization. And you can have very good designers in both. And they have not to be similar, because it's very good to be so diverse, because you participate in different moments of the trajectory of the innovation. And it's important if we are here, if you are, I mean, in a school, then mainly it's a school of people that is here because they are gifted as creative, to not to kill the creativity, not to kill the creativity under a burden of a life cycle of something. I did the life cycle analysis at the beginning of my story, but it's not. We have to understand something, but it's not our job. There should be somebody else, or the impact is a fundamental impact, and you designer have to know that there is an impact, but it's not us. Somebody else has to make the impact. We, again in metaphor, we have to throw the stones, and somebody else has to look to the waves. And when I throw the stone, I can imagine that some waves can happen. but it's not me, the same person. If I am a creative person, if I have ideas, etc., I cannot kill my creativity, because the change that is needed asks also for creativity. Of course, somebody, the overall system has also to evaluate, to limit, to say what has not to be done. And we have to know a little bit of life cycle analysis. As say, if you design a chair, you are not an engineer, but you have to know a little bit of plastic, a little bit of metals, a little bit of transformation, but you are not an engineer, and what you know about the materials should not kill your creativity. And we have not yet learned how to work on social issue, maintaining, knowing enough, but not more. Because if you are overwhelmed by this information, you don't, your pencil is still, you cannot have any idea. So we have to imagine, and the idea of saying, oh my, they have to know this and that, comes from the very old mechanistic idea that pretended that somebody knows everything. So you have to control everything. And so you have to know more, because if you don't know where, no. You have to risk, yes, you have to risk. In planning, and also here I'm sure that you use it, there is something that tells very well the story for me. It's the tactical planning. You know what is the tactical planning? Yes or not? Sorry.
No.
Somebody knows, somebody knows. Before it was like this. We have to plan something. We start to study, and after you discover that it's so complex, and you study, and you spend a lot of time studying, and you say, this is a perfect project, you start to build the perfect project, and in the time that you finish your perfect project, everything is changed. So you studied a lot to create something that at the end is not anymore adequate. The tactical planning says, it's not that you can use it every time, but let's make something happen and see what happens. So I intervene in a street, I intervene in a square, not with the final solution, not having done all the possible research, but having done a little bit of research, understanding something that maybe could work, and in a very short time, and with a very low price, I try to simulate how things can go, and see what happens, see how the people react, and afterward maybe we can move from the stories that I'm telling you happen in many places. I'm sure that happens also here. So you start making some benches that are more or less cheap benches, just to understand how it could be in the street, if people could sit in the corner, and afterward maybe you can intervene in a more solid way. So this way of working with prototypes, making things happen, seeing what happens. So the idea of co-design not as a process around the table. So if there is also, I look to my friends that have been more involved than me in all the story about the co-design, but if I say co-design, people think people around the table drawing on the piece of paper and putting stickers on the wall. But co-design is a much more complex process. It happens in the streets. It happens because something happened. Somebody reacts, somebody changes after the reaction. And if you are clever enough, maybe the overall system learn how to do it. And at the end, nobody really controls it totally, but altogether things go in a certain way. Let me say one last thing. This is phenomenological, so it's observing the reality. The theory behind this is written in a beautiful book of, oh yeah, old, I'm so old, but it will come, it's called Down to Earth, and it says that we never produce, we only help to engendering. And this means that nobody really can say what will happen. You simply plug in the reality your little thing, and you try to control your plug, your subsystem, but afterward there will be so many. It was Bruno Latour, the one that the name escaped to me. So it's not a very non-known person, it's a very well-known person. Bruno Latour in this book says that we do not produce but we engender. And engender means that we extract from the complexity where everything is linked to everything else a little part, we try to control it, and afterward we bring back into the reality and something happens. And I have tried to make happen something, but I cannot control. I cannot know what will happen at the end. So the result is not the result of my design. It's the result of the interaction in between what I tried to control and design and all the rest of the story. So this way, ask for creativity, ask for daring, ask for the contrary of a certain stereotype that came up when we talk about co-design. There was not to talk, not to say, not to influence, listen enough, so be very quiet. No, something has to happen. Some stones has to be thrown in the water.
Shall we open up to the public? Because I could see there were some hands up. Claire, did you want to ask a question? And John? Oh no. Do you need it?
Yeah.
Quick questions
So
and quick
very
answers, please.
quickly.
Because we have the room only for 5 minutes.
Just regarding what you were saying, Ezio,
I'm
about...
here because I am also a little bit.
I don't know if this microphone's actually doing anything. I don't think it's... Yeah, I don't think it was really...
I can hear because they don't.
Just a bit of background. About 3 hours ago, Ezio was sitting in my living room while I was working.
We have a love story.
And I was actually working on a life cycle analysis conversation with my colleague. And so I just want to pick up on this because I agree with you that there's no way I can ever do a life cycle analysis, create it, interfere with it, modify it and understand it. But what I do need to do is be able to understand it sufficiently to know how to communicate the complexity of that document to a specific public, a specific audience. So I do agree with you, I think collaboration is absolutely critical, but I think you do as a designer have to put your toe in the water, going back to the sailing analysis, comparison. You have to be able to put your toe in that water to get a basic understanding of some complex stuff.
But no, we have not a love story at the moment. We know since she was a girl, so we know since a long time. But and we agree. But it's the same as if I take an example on product design. If you want to design a chair in plastic, you need to know enough about plastic to have a kind of feeling of how you can model the plastic. And so you have to know how it works. But you are not an engineer that is the one that is really to make all the calculation and making all these kinds of things. So in the product design is enough clear what kind of knowledge about specific knowledge you have to be capable in the horizontal part of your knowledge to interact with the other, for giving the right question, etc., etc. You have not to be overwhelmed. And the same is in your case. She works, in this case at least, on packaging, so this is a kind of product design, and she has to be aware of life cycle analysis, but and maybe I don't know if you do personally the life cycle analysis, but maybe some designers do it, but it's not the case that you the designer. In my view, there is also a conflict of interest in some way. In any case, I agree. So we have the horizontal part that has to be the one that permits us to understand and to be capable to discuss, in the case that Claire was saying, with the engineer that makes the life cycle analysis, and at the end other engineers that make the impact, the final impact of the story. But okay.
There is a question. John, did you have a question? Okay. Let's pick John's question and then Georgi.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to challenge the idea of the vertical T, because I was very inspired years ago by your idea that the job of the designer is to imagine very, very clearly. But what I think has happened is that we've created so many specialisms that they can be manipulated by others. So it's not the many post-it notes that never add up to one thing, but the fact that we're not training ourselves to think beyond the paradigm. And the paradigm is out of sync. I mean, Thomas Kuhn wrote about this years ago, didn't he? The paradigm is always out of sync with the names and words that we use. So my question really is which comes first, and whether designers can actually seed the next paradigm and make it imaginable, because once it's imaginable, the world will change.
Yes, but I don't think this is a question, this is a matter of fact. So our specificity, so what is creativity? Is to look what exists and to imagine that could be different. So every human being has some degree of creativity, and we probably should be auto-selected. We go to study design because we feel that we have a certain creativity, and the school should help our creativity to exercise. And creativity is the beginning of in my wording, that maybe the same that you say, to make the system reframing. So the system reframing is, so in my wording, what you said. So you face a problem, for instance, the problem of the elderly population. If the elderly population is a problem, and you tell it in this way, there is no solution, because there are more elderly than young people. So in the traditional way, there is no solution. It's an intractable problem. The twist, what should happen, the creative step, is to imagine that the elderly are not only the problem. The elderly can have some capabilities, and having some capability, instead of proposing something considering the elderly only as a problem, you can consider the elderly also as a part of the same solution. And when you do this kind of shift, it's a system reframing, because the way in which you can imagine ideas, system, products, services, if you consider that all the elderly as me are only problems, if you consider they could still, as in my case, luckily until now, I can have still some capability of doing things, it's a different way. So creativity, in my view, is this one: be capable to look to what exists and to imagine how you can change, how you can leverage on some element and transform something that was implicit, something explicit. Can you say your name over?
I'm Mick Finch. I'm actually not a designer, but I work here.
Nobody's perfect, no, don't worry.
And I just wonder, social innovation and actually Italian organisations have been very successful in relationship to the Horizon programme. And in reference to the visibility question you were talking about, and also the context around tactical planning.
About?
Tactical planning, the thing you were talking about. The other side, the bad side, what tactical, anyway. I just wonder, how do you think social innovation has been served by the apparatus by the apparatus of Horizon, by the mechanisms of Horizon? It's a very complex, heavy system. Well, I don't want to say more than that. Do you? Because it's been very taken up by the program in a good way. But do you think it's been served well?
I try to answer, imagining that I answer to your question. If it's not the answer to your question, means I have not understood. If it is the last part of the question, if I well understood, is how are the models that brings to change in a huge complex system? And the first is the complex is a change. So we have evidence that also the very complex system change. So because somebody could say the complex systems do not change. No, the complex systems change. We move from society that was a farm and feudal society toward a modern society. Big change, it happens. How the change happened? There is somebody somewhere that have the will to drive the change, that has the overall ideas and change? No. I am sure that normally people say the revolution started in England in the half of the 18th century. I'm sure that nobody in the half of the 18th century had the idea of what an industrial society will be. They had ideas of what they wanted to do. And afterward, if you look to the old component that generate this, it was something started before the big move from Catholicism to Protestant, the accumulation of wealth through the colonies, some entrepreneurial activities. So many different pieces that in some way converge and engendered, generated, something emerged. And I think that this, if it is happened in moving from the feudal society to the industrial society, it could happen, the model should be more or less the same, to move from our societies to other societies, maybe for the good, hopefully, or maybe for the bad, as it appears in this moment. So the model of change is, for sure something has to happen in what me and others call the molecular scale, so at the very small level. Because the molecular scale generates the beginning, not only small change, because somebody says, yes, but they are so small, but they can generate the new ideas. And the new ideas can generate big new frame, in which many small things start to have a different meaning. So it's a combination in between changing something, creating locally the beginning of a new way of looking to things, and afterward creating larger visions that put together these small activities and create new frames. And at a certain point, as we were discussing before with John, you can have the shift, that is the system reframing. When at a certain point you say, hey, we are not anymore a feudal society, we are an industrial society, and people start to think about the society as industrial, where there was some feudal society inside the industrial society, as before there was a feudal society with inside some element of the industrial one. And now I dare to say we are in a society that is post-modern and post-industrial and post-whatever society. Internally to this, we are the beginning of something else. And for what I regard myself, I am activist in trying to promote that there is something that is happening that could be the beginning of a new civilization. And the change is how all these things will go together and generate stronger ideas that at the moment is not exactly what is happening.
The last question, I think, Lorraine.
Okay.
Lorraine.
This is going to be very quick. So your title of your talk is Sailing Against the Wind, and I have 3 PhD students here who are trying to sail against the prison because they're working in prison and trying to change it. And you raised years ago the idea that you know, the world needs an army of young designers not working on luxury brands but actually going to change the world, and I agree with that entirely. But I want to ask you the question that you raised: how to maintain the original quality of social and ecological value on projects when the world seems to be falling apart.
Yeah.
So what message do you have? You know, and I think that, you know, the answer might be keep going, because what else is there? People remain marginalised. But what message do you have for the room?
It's not bad question. It's, I don't have one message
No, you've got a lot.
to
I
finish
know.
and
Go,
everybody
give them a
goes home
message.
and do like this and it's perfect. I maybe everything that I said today is an answer to your question. So first of all, there is no one mechanical solution. So we are designers, we say we are dealing with wicked problems, no? And all the problems are wicked at the end. So you have to be capable to navigate and to have some vision and to remain on this topic for some time, and try to build something more. And afterward to be capable also to change the direction if you see that it's not anymore. So maybe the very long goal is remain the same, but I have to move like this. So how to recognize this kind of capability, and I repeat what I said before, to be at the same time capable to have the vision, but also to be very linked to what happens physically where you are. So to be very super local, but not because we are local, because we think that doing small things is a solution, but because the new radical ideas emerge at the level in which it's possible to make some systemic change, thanks to your projects and to your will. And afterward, this can generate larger ideas. So if we now talk about, not to talk always about the city, rethink the welfare, is because there have been hundreds of thousands of people that started to, in some way, recognize that the issue about the new problem of the society, of the elderly society, of the chronic illness, of the mental disease that we have, are not an issue only for medical and nurseries. It's an issue about being together and recreating a society that is capable to care. How it can be done, but enough to think that we are not only waiting for somebody that brings the solution to us, but we have to be part of the solutions. And to be part of the solution, we have to find somebody else that shares some ideas with us. That seems to be simple, but this is a very strong principle that is against the majority of whatever has been claimed until now on what's the role of the new technology, the smart cities, the green cities, and all these kind of stories.
So we are 15 minutes late, but I know this. You two have questions. Maybe you both ask the questions in a series, because we really need to leave the building by like 5 yes now. But you ask, and then you try to give a concise answer to both of them.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jorge. I'm doing a joint master's here. It's like disability design and innovation. So basically, we are looking at
What is your name?
Jorge,
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you come from?
Peru.
Peru?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
So basically, we are looking at how we can make products and services more fair, accessible, inclusive. My question is, because I'm starting my dissertation, so basically I'm doing a critique of like the human-centered design. So like how we can push towards a more like environmental direction. So my question is like, what are your thoughts about like environmental-centered design? Like you go just not puts the people in the center, but also like non-living entities.
So,
And maybe shall we listen to this and you try to give a.
Oh, so
I don't know if that's
I'm so nervous, but I'm not trying to ask a question. I just want to have a kind of things about saying like, so I'm E and I'm Lauren's PhD students. Like we are three, yeah, both. Oh, Lauren's PhD students, and I want to say like when you are using the metaphor about the sailing against the wind, and I feel like you are the captain, like leading, and both Lauren and you are trying to leading this field of this, which made me really encouraged and inspiring. And also I really inspired by you saying we are kind of like international students are in European to studying here, and we are always thinking in a European way. I've never thought of this. Yeah, that's my.
Thank you. Okay, so the question about environmental centered design.
Two things. One, I will be short. The metaphors are beautiful, and I think that as a designer we have to make metaphors. They are very powerful, but we have not to fall in love too much. No, because the metaphor help to imagine something, but they are not the reality. So I don't know. When you now was talking about the captain and the sailor, etc., so it's not said that we have to develop that metaphor at that level, because maybe it's not. This is only to say what I said. Metaphor are good, but are metaphor. Afterward, we have not to take from the metaphor everything. So there is a limit that can be used. And okay, for the rest, thanks. It was very good consideration. And the user-centered, to be short, but we can talk. You said that we had to go out from the building. I said it was the fire. So I don't know what is happening. The building is going to explode.
The technician needs to take the camera and they need to go home.
Okay, we can talk a little bit, but I give an answer for everybody. You listened him to before talking about this thematic cluster on the fringe, etc., etc. That is one of the part of the story. But we have another. So DESIS is organized in thematic clusters, and one of the thematic clusters is exactly what would be the connection between our stories, in our case about social innovation, and the more than human. And the core of the story that we want to verify is if the notion of community can be extended to the more than human. So if we can imagine that you can have something that can be called community, now we make inverted comma because in principle the non-human cannot enter in the normal idea of community. But what does it mean if we stretch the idea of community, considering that there are also the non-human? By the way, in relation to the human-centered, it's not only, yes, the human should really be all the human, because the example that I did before, the B&B or the platform economy, is super well designed because they have nothing to spend. They had all the money is spent in designing better. It's super well designed, but it's super well designed for the user and not for others. So it's not only for the maybe if we say the human, maybe you introduce also the worker, also the other persons, and the next step is also the non-humans. So if you ask to him the link to those people that are working, this is our contribution. So it's a discussion that is done, and of course it's really very challenging.
Thank you. And also thanks for bringing into the discussion also the other cluster, which is also very relevant, and as well marks a shift in the field of design for social innovation to also consider the more the human. Just thank everyone for staying here. Sorry for my terrible time management and staying over time. I know some people already had to leave. Thanks Ezio for coming back to UAL after 10 years, and I mean you have visited us recently also, but it's an honor really to be inspired by you. And also I needed to thank Felicity Coleman, who supported this event, and Trevor Keeble, who actually gave new energy to our UAL DESIS lab. And thanks to everyone. And as well, I feel so, I'm always an optimist, but when you started the slides with all these dark pictures of war, and then in the end I'm feeling energized with this collective hope that we can care for each other, care for the more than human, and we together can sail against the wind. So with this energy I think we can navigate to other worlds.